let's pivot over and talk about that a little bit in regard to banks, because you see banks are another sector today that are really feeling the love. I mean, I'm looking at Bank of America here, for example, right now as we're recording the show. Bank of America shares are up 14%. I mean, we're seeing. I was looking at Ameris Bancorp earlier. Ameris Bancorp up 20+% today. So you're seeing that covering everywhere from big banks to small banks and everywhere in between. This is an interest rate related news, of course, but banks are going to benefit from positive economic news, right? I mean, they're going to benefit from a healthy economy. And if this is one step closer to a healthier economy, then you can certainly understand the optimism in banks today as well.
Right. Well, there's kind of two reasons you're seeing banks benefit from this. Number one is interest rates. This isn't interest rate specific news, but the 10-year Treasury soared to its highest level since March today.
There you
And
go.
so that's kind of a forward-looking indicator that the economy's going to be healthier than people thought. Higher interest rates means higher profits for banks, but that's really not the main driving force. The main driving force is that there's a fear that there's going to be kind of a long-tailed uptick in loan losses. People can't afford to pay their bills, things like that. That's going to go on until this pandemic is over. And it's a well-founded fear. If you look at the numbers during the financial crisis, when unemployment was elevated for a couple of years after the financial crisis, loan losses at some of these lenders stayed pretty high.
Yeah.
So there's that fear. And the sooner we can get back to business as usual, the sooner that fear goes away. And we're starting to see some of that today. And if you look at some of the riskier consumer-facing lenders, you're seeing it, the gains even higher. You mentioned Ameris, which is pretty much a consumer-facing bank.
Mm-hmm.
American Express is up 21% today.
Wow.
Making our friend Warren Buffett a lot of money in the process.
Everybody, it's easy to forget. American Express is a bank. Yes, it's that credit card in your wallet, but it is technically a bank, and so it's beholden to all of those capital requirements and those rules and whatnot that your Bank of America's and J.P. Morgan's have to adhere to as well.
They are the lender for, if you use your Amex card, American Express is the company lending you money.
That's right.
So if you run into trouble, you lose your job, something like that, and can't afford to pay it back, American Express is the one who gets left with an uncollectible debt. So as the fears of that kind of start to go away, you're going to see those companies benefit. The more consumer-facing banks like Ameris, like American Express, Wells Fargo out of the big four, I think, was the biggest mover today because it's a consumer-facing bank.
Yeah.
Not just an investment bank. And if you look at some of the investment banks like Goldman Sachs, it's up by 7% today, which the fact that it's up by 7% and it's like the worst gain in the sector is pretty impressive. But that's because the investment banking business has generally held up better during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And you're seeing all these consumer-facing banks really pop because of the, experts are less fearful that you're going to see this long-tailed loan default wave come through.
And then you look even deeper into some of those numbers, and we've seen this over the past couple of quarters, at least with a lot of these banks. The themes during a lot of these calls have really revolved around those loan loss reserves. These banks are reserving a lot of money. They're putting a lot of money aside for the potential, for the possible losses that they could incur. Those losses don't materialize, or they don't materialize to the levels that those banks thought that they would. Well, that's a lot of money they put aside that is then going to be able to go really right back down to the bottom line for these banks at the end of the day.
Yeah, they call that a reserve release, and you see that you saw that a little bit in a few of the banks in the third quarter. They were setting aside billions and billions of dollars in the first half of the year, and it turns out that the pandemic didn't turn out to a worst case scenario economically. Right. Part of that was due to the CARES Act. Part of that was due to just, it didn't continue to spiral out of control in March. It kind of leveled off after the shutdowns and things like that. So the economic impacts weren't a worst case scenario. 2020 hasn't been a great economic year by any definition of the word, but we definitely avoided a worst case scenario. So banks were able to release a little bit of their reserves, some banks, during the third quarter. If there's a widely available vaccine and the pandemic ends, and we can, the unemployment already is under 7% in this country. If it falls back to pre-pandemic levels, which were in the 3 and 4% range, then you'll see a lot of these reserves come back and be released, and that turns into a big earnings boost for these banks.
Yeah, yeah,
we saw that in
absolutely.
the years following the financial crisis when they were finally allowed to release some reserves.